Chris, the promise of Oppenheimer as a fulfilling mature film was one of the only things that kept me going during the horrific last year or so of entertainment. I endured She-Hulk attorney at law, Little Leia running away, the death of Wade, Aquafina's rap, Lizzo and Jack Black in the Star Wars show, the insufferable smugness of Galadriel, Velma, Peter Pan getting punched out, Indiana Jones getting punched out, MODOK's ass, Snow White and the Seven Magical People, and 100 other degradations and travails, and I could endure it because Oppenheimer lay on the horizon. Chris, I was like one of those Japanese soldiers still fighting in the jungle years after the war for you. I was like a gambling addict putting everything he has left on one last big gamble on the roulette wheel, watching it spin and saying, "Come on, I need this." And this is what we get. Oppenheimer isn't a bad film, but it sure is a disappointing one. Cillian Murphy leads an ensemble cast as J. Robert Oppenheimer, the theoretical physicist who was credited with being the father of the atomic bomb for his role in the Manhattan Project, the World War II undertaking that developed the first nuclear weapons. At least that's what the film ought mainly to have been about. Instead, we get an unexpected and largely unwelcome extension beyond this into the later decades of Oppenheimer's life, where the main narrative drive is the possible ruin of his reputation, and Christopher Nolan exhibits all of his worst qualities, a fastidiousness bordering on a pedantic need to be intricate in including information, peripheral characters, often at the expense of emotional connectedness. Because he has the drive to include too much across the span of a complicated and consequential life, the whole thing feels laborious, yet many of the scenes rushed, with people interacting to quickly fulfill a checklist of requirements for the plot and character development. It has the feel of accumulated and arranged cells of storytelling, rather than fluid, naturalistic storytelling. Thankfully, Cillian Murphy is outstanding as Oppenheimer. Intellectual, alluring, ironical, able to balance a multitude of characteristics compellingly. Almost the whole cast is superb, and wring the most out of the dialogue, despite its limitations. Emily Blunt's Kitty is riven with strain, resentment, languishing often in her husband's shadow, and at other times assertively loyal. She is able to convey a lifetime's worth of complexity in their relationship. Matt Damon is also excellent, a grounded, cynical foil to Oppenheimer, able to exude just the right touch of likability. Florence Pugh is an earlier love of Oppenheimer, is good as a bohemian, more raw, sexual, instinctive, and neurotic counterpoint to Kitty. The biggest disappointment is Robert Downey Jr. as Lewis Strauss, an American official who, at a congressional hearing, is trying to get himself appointed to the United States cabinet. I don't know what happened here. It starts off okay, with him as a cynical, shrewd creature of Washington, and whose backroom machinations are interesting enough, but then he is centered as a main antagonist, changing the nature of the film from the Manhattan Project to a punishingly long third act about the denigrating of Oppenheimer's reputation as a consequence of Strauss's ambition. Downey Jr. hammily overacts, making Strauss a conniving villain with straining dialogue and Machiavellian portent and posturing that tries but fails to fill the dramatic vacuum after the test bomb trial earlier. Half an hour or more after that series of scenes, the audience in the theater was tangibly dulled by what turns out to be a wholly different emphasis for the film. An hour or more of confirmation hearings, people talking in rooms, people cutting others loose under professional pressure, depositions, lawyerly banter, with the promised spectacle of the film and its moral questions and profound scope gradually winnowing around matters of career advancement, Washington power, professional reputation, and other matters that seem underwhelming, even a little banal, in the wake of the history-changing events of earlier. And instead of offering any kind of catharsis, we just keep wading deeper into this morass, about which it is hard to sustain much attention or focus. The film begins driven by the interesting tensions not only of Oppenheimer's rise, but of the historical necessity of his rise, the interesting tensions of his appeal as a maverick, and the dubious relationships and moral lapses he has along the way. The interesting tensions of a ticking clock, firstly against the Germans and their own prospective program, then, as the war is heading towards its end, the interesting tensions of many of the physicists wrestling with their moral uncertainty, the tension of maintained secrecy at the site, and of the program as a whole, and the interesting interplay between the sternly practical character played by Matt Damon and the intellectual, less knowable Oppenheimer. The half hour leading up to the test explosion is truly gripping, and the moment of detonation handled with skillful restraint. For this to then lapse into a further hour of domestic and political issues is an awful, almost presumptive turn from Christopher Nolan. After a multitude of tensions and stakes on the grandest scale, it is hard to care about any of the ensuing stakes, and the film goes from a satisfying biopic with a natural arc to an Oliver Stone film like JFK, full of political intrigue and themes about shadowy power and influence. Nolan's efforts to lend this tediously drawn-out third-act excitement and make it compelling are probably the impetus for Downey Jr.'s overacting, the hyped-up reveals, and the by now incongruously throbbing percussive soundtrack. There are between 30 and 40 significant characters throughout, which is quite demanding, and with some, the roles blur into abstracted associations and functions. Because of this, plot reveals fall a little flat, because it requires a lot of application to sort out the reactions and implications among so many mid to minor characters. A late appearance by Gary Oldman as Harry Truman is closer to caricature, and the whole scene is rushed and botched. Nolan has often been criticized for a certain coldness, an austerity, and the worst thing possible seems to have happened here, which is he has become aware of the criticism and tried to tackle it practically head-on, with more abstractly expressive moments. But they are almost all contrived and awful. He tries to convey Oppenheimer's complicated regret and moral tensions through warping or tremulous scenery or walls behind him. He tries to convey emotional or moral shock through the whole set going white, in a clunky, analogous way to the bomb's detonation, and even tries to convey the sexual exposure and regret of Oppenheimer's confession on record of his affair with Florence Pugh's character by having Pugh manifested in the scene of a trial room, naked and astride him. Shaking or lurching camera work, rapid cuts, surrealist silence and slow-motion hyperfocus on elements of a crowd. None of it is sophisticated or impressive or immersive, or gives us a visceral feeling of Oppenheimer's internal conflicts. This is a rare film in which the first and third acts are the least appealing. If I were to watch it again, I would fast forward to the Los Alamos section concerning the development and detonation of the bomb and its immediate aftermath, and forego the last hour altogether.